Nature of sources and historical construction. Material remains. The methods of archaeology help us to recover the material remains of the past relating to ancient, medieval, and modern periods of our history. In India, many other countries, archaeology is used to study prehistory and ancient history. Prehistory is concerned with the period for which there are no written sources, and history is basically based on written materials. Prehistoric sites differ from historical sites in several respects. Generally, they are not in form of prominent habitation remains, but principally of fossils of human plants and animals. They are found on the hill slopes of plateaus and mountains, and on the bank of nearby rivers or terraces, and comprise sundry fauna and flora. More importantly, numerous stone tools from the Stone Age have been found at these sites. The remains of tools, plants, animals, and humans from pre-ice age indicate the climate conditions that prevailed at the time, although writing was known in India by the middle of 3rd millennium BC in the Indus culture. It has no far been deciphered, thus, though the Harappans knew how to write, their culture is placed in the protohistoric phase. The same is the case with the Chalcolithic or Copper Stone Age cultures, which had no writing. Decipherable writing was known in India only in 3rd century BC with the Ashokan inscriptions, providing solid evidence for historical reconstruction from that time. However, despite the critical use of Vedic and post-Vedic literary sources for history in pre-Ashokan times, archaeology remains a very important source for historians. The ancient Indians left innumerable material remains, the stone temples in South India and the brick monasteries in eastern India still stand to remind us of the great building activities of the past. However, the major part of these remains lies buried in mound scattered all over India. A mound is an elevated portion of land covering the remains of old habitation. It may be different two types: single culture, major culture, and multiculture. Single culture mounds represent only one culture throughout. Some mounds represent only the painted graveware PGW culture, others Sadhvana culture, and yet others that of the Kushanas. In major culture mounds, one culture is dominant and other culture are of secondary importance. Multicultural mounds represent several important cultures in succession which occasionally overlap with one another, as is the case with the Ramayana and Mahabharata. An excavated mound can be used to understand successive layers of material and other aspects of a culture. A mound can be excavated vertically or horizontally. Vertical excavation means lengthwise digging to uncover the period wise sequence of cultures. It is generally confined to a part of the site. Horizontal excavation entails digging the mound as a whole or a major part of it. The method may enable the excavator to obtain a complete idea of the site culture in a particular period. As most sites have been dug vertically, they provide a good chronological sequence of material culture. Horizontal digging being very expensive, are very few in numbers, with the result that the excavation do not give us a full or even adequate picture of material life in many phases of ancient Indian history. Even in those mounds which have been excavated, the ancient remains have been preserved in varying proportion in the dry arid climate with western UP, Rajasthan and northwestern India. Antiquities are found in a better state of preservation, but in the moist and humid climate of the mid Gangetic plains and in the deltic region, even iron implements suffered corrosion and mud structures become difficult to detect. Only the burned brick structures or stone structures of Gangetic plains are well preserved. Excavation have brought to light the village that people established around 6000 BC in Balochistan. They also tell us about the material culture which was developed in Gangetic plains in the second millennium BC. They show the layout of state settlements in which people lived, the types of pottery they used, the form of house in which they dwelt, the kind of cereals they ate, and the type of tools and implements they used. Some people in South India buried in grave along with the dead their tools, weapons, pottery, and other belongings. These were encircled by large pieces of stone. These structures are called megalith, although some megaliths do not fall in the category. By digging them, we learn of the life people lived in Deccan from the Iron Age onward. The science that enables us to dig the successive layers of old mounds and to form an idea of material life of the people is called archaeology. Their dates are fixed by various methods. Of them, radiocarbon dating is the most important. Radiocarbon or carbon 14 is radioactive carbon isotope which is present in living objects. It decay like all radioactive substances at a uniform rate. When an object is living, the process of decay of C14 is neutralized by absorption of C14 through air and food. However, when an object ceases to be alive, its C14 content continues to decay at a uniform rate but ceases to absorb C14 from air and food. But measuring the loss of C14 content in an ancient object, its age can be determined. This is because, as stated earlier, the decay of C14 takes place at uniform rate. It is known that the half-life of C14 is 5 1568 years. The half life of a radioactive material is defined as the period during which half the radioactive content in an object disappears. Thus, the C14 content in an object that ceased to live 5568 years ago would be half life of what it was when it was living, and in an object which ceased to live 11,136 years ago. It is its C14 content could be one fourth of that it had been when it was living, but no antiquity older than 70,000 years can be dated by this method. The history of climate and vegetation is known through an examination of planet residues and especially through pollen analysis. On this basis, it is staged that agriculture was practiced in Rajasthan and Kashmir around 7,000 to 6,000 BC. The nature and components of metal artifacts are analyzed scientifically, and consequently the mines from which the metals were obtained are located and stages in the development of metal technology identified. An examination of animal bones show whether the animals were domesticated and also indicates the use of which they were put. I may add that archaeology provides a kind of soil archive which contains various material remains. However, for a total study of prehistory extending roughly up to 3000 BC or so, it is necessary to get an idea of history of the soil, rocks, etc. This is provided by geological studies. Similarly, the world of plants and animals keeps on changing through at a slow pace. Their history is provided by biological studies. Human history cannot be understood without an idea of the continuing interaction between soils, plants, and animals on the one hand and humans on the other hand. Geological and biological advances enable us to understand not only prehistory but also history. Taken together with archaeological remains, geological and biological studies act as important sources for the history of over 98% of the total time scale of history, starting with the origin of the earth. Coins, although a large number of coins and inscriptions have been found on the surface, many of them have been unearthed by digging. The study of coins is called numismatics. Ancient Indian currency was not issued in form of paper as as is the case nowadays, but as metal coins. Ancient coins were made of metal, copper, silver, gold, and lead. Coin molds made of burnt clay have been discovered in large numbers, most of them related to the Kushan period, that is, the first three Christian centuries. The use of such molds in the post Gupta period virtually disappeared. As there was nothing like the modern banking system in ancient times, people stored money in earthenware and also in brass vessels, maintained them as precious hoards on which they could fall back in time of need. Many of these woods containing not only Indian coins but also those minted abroad, such as the Roman Empire, have been discovered in different parts of India. They are preserved mostly in museums in Kolkata, Patna, Lucknow, Delhi, Jaipur, Mumbai, and Chennai. There are many Indian coins in the Museum of Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. As Britain ruled over India for a long time, British officials succeeded in transferring many of the Indian coins to private and public collection in Britain. Coins of the major dynasties have been catalogued and published. We have catalogues of the coin in Indian museums at Kolkata, of Indian coins in the British Museum in London, and so on. Nonetheless, there are a large number of coins that have yet to be catalogued and published. Our earliest coins contain a few symbols, but the latter coins depict the figure of kings and divinities, and also mention their names and dates. Their areas where they are found indicate the region of their circulation. This has enabled us to reconstruct the history of several ruling dynasties, especially of the Indo Greeks who came to India from North Afghanistan and ruled here in the 2nd and the 1st centuries BC. As coins were used for various purposes such as donation, a mode of payment, and a medium of exchange, they threw considerable light on economic history. Some coins were issued by guilds of merchants and goldsmiths with the permission of the rulers. This shows the crafts and commerce had become important. Coins helped transactions on a large scale and contributed to trade. The larger number of Indian coins date to the post-modern period. These were made from lead, protein, copper, bronze, silver, gold. The Guptas issued the largest number of gold coins. All this indicates that trade and commerce flourished, especially in post Maurya and a good part of the Gupta period. However, only a few coins belonging to the post Gupta period have been found, which indicates a decline of trade and commerce in that period. Coins also portray kings and goods and contain religious symbols and legends, all of which threw light on the art and religion of the time. Cowries, cowries were also used as coins, though their purchasing power was low. They appear in substantial number in post Gupta time, but may have been used earlier. Inscriptions. Far more important than coins are inscriptions. Their study is called epigraphy, and the study of the old writing used in inscription and other old records is called paleography. Inscriptions were carved on scales, stone pillars, rocks, copper plates, temple walls, wooden tables, and bricks or images. In India as a whole, the earlier inscriptions were recorded on stone. However, in the early centuries of Christian era, copper plate began to be used for this purpose. Even then, the practice of engraving inscription on stone continued on a large scale in South India. We have also in that region a large number of inscriptions recorded on the wall of temples of serve as permanent records. Like coins, inscriptions are preserved in various museums of the country, but the largest number may be found in the office of chief epigraphist at Mysore. The earliest inscriptions were written in Prakrit in the 3rd century BC. Sanskrit was adopted as an epigraphic medium in the 2nd century AD. Its use became widespread in the 4th and 5th centuries, but even then Prakrit continued to be used. Inscriptions began to be composed in regional languages in the 9th and 10th centuries. Most inscriptions bearing on the history of Maurya, post Maurya, and Gupta period have been published in a series of collection called Corpus Inscriptionum Indicatum. Corpus Inscriptionum Indicatum, but not many inscriptions of the post Gupta period figure is such systematic compilations. In the case of South India, topographical lists of inscription have been published. Still over 50,000 inscriptions, mostly of South India, awaits publication. The Harappan inscription, which await decipherment, seem to have been written in a pictographic script in which ideas and objects were expressed in formation of pictures. Most Ashokan inscriptions were engraved in Brahmanic scripts, which was written from left to right, but some were incised in the Kharosti script, which was written from right to left. However, the Brahmi script prevailed virtually all over India except for the northwest part. Greek and Aramaic scripts were employed in writing Ashokan inscriptions in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but Brahmi continues to be the main script till the end of Gupta times. The epigraphist can be decipher most Indian inscriptions, but to about the 7th century, if he has mastered Brahmi and its variations. But subsequently, we notice strong regional variation in this script. Inscriptions found on the seals of Harappa belonging to about 2500 BC are considered symbolic by some scholars. For Indian history, the earliest deciphered inscriptions are Iranian. They belong to the 6th 5th centuries BC, are found in Iran. They appear in Old Indo Iranian and also in Semitic languages in the uh, cuneiform script. They speak of the Iranian consequent of Hindu and Sindhu area. Of course, the earliest deciphered are Ashokan inscriptions. They are generally written in Brahmi script and Prakrit language in the 3rd century BC. They throw light on Maurya history and Ashoka's achievements. In the 14th century AD, two Ashokan pillar inscriptions were found by Firoz Shah Tughlaq, one in Meerut and another place called Topra in Haryana. He brought them to Delhi and asked the Pandits for his empire to decipher the inscriptions. They failed to do so. The same difficulty was faced by the British when, in the last quarter of the 18th century, they discovered Ashokan inscriptions. These epigraphs were first deciphered in 1837 by James Prinsep, a civil servant in the employ of East India Company in Bengal. We have various types of inscriptions. Some convey royal orders and decisions regarding social, religious, and administrative masters to official and the people in general. Ashokan inscriptions belong to the category. Others are votive records of the followers of Buddhism, Jainism, Vaishnavism, Saivism, and the like. They appear on pillars, tablets, temples, or images as marks of devotion. Yet other types of eulogize the attributes, the achievements of kings and conquerors and ignore their defeats and weaknesses. To this category belong to the Allahabad pillar inscription of Samudragupta. Finally, we have many donative records which refer especially to gifts of money, cattle, land, etc., mainly for religious purpose, made not only by kings and princes but also by artisans and merchants. Inscriptions recording land grants made mainly by chiefs and princesses are very important for the study of the land system and administration in ancient India. These were mostly engraved on corpulates. They recorded grants of lands, revenues, and villages made to monks, priests, and temples, monasteries, vessels, and officials. They were written in all languages, including Prakrit, Sanskrit, Tamil, and Telugu. Literary sources, although the ancient Indians knew how to write as early as 2500 BC, our most ancient manuscripts are not older than the AD 4th century and are found in Central Asia. In India, they were written on birch bark and palm leaves, but in Central Asia, where the Prakrit language had spread from India, India manuscripts were also written on sheep leather and wooden tablets. These writings are called inscriptions, but they are as good as manuscripts when painting was not known. Manuscripts were very highly valued, although old Sanskrit manuscripts are found all over India. They mostly related to South India, Kashmir, and Nepal. Currently, inscriptions are largely preserved in museums and manuscripts in libraries. Most ancient books contain religious themes. Hindu religious literature includes the Vedas and Ramayana and the Mahabharata, the Puranas and the like. They throw considerable light on the social and cultural conditions of ancient times, but it is difficult to use them in the context of time and place. The Rig Veda may be assigned to c. 1500 to 100 BC, though such collection as the Atharva Veda, Yajur Veda, and Brahmanas, Aranyaks, and the Upanishads date roughly to 1000 to 500 BC. Almost every Vedic text contains interpolations which generally appear at the beginning or the end of the later Vedic text comprise prayers as well as rituals, magics, and mythological stories. However, the Upanishads contain philosophical speculations. In order to understand the Vedic texts, it was necessary to study the Vedangas and the limbs of Veda. These supplements of Veda comprised phonetic ritual, grammar, etymology, metric, and astronomy, and much literature grew around each of these subjects. They were written in the form of perspect in prose. A precept was called a sutra because of its brevity. The most famous example of this writing is Grammar of Manini, written around 450 BC. While illustrating the rules of grammar, Manini cast the invaluable light on the society, economy, and culture of his times. The two epics of and the major Puranas seem to have been finally compiled by c. AD 400. Of these epics, the Mahabharata attributed to Vyasa, the Vyasa is older and possibly reflects the state of affairs from the 10th century BC to AD 4th century. Originally, it considered of 8,800 verses and was called Jaya, or a collection dealing with victory. These were increased to 24,000 and came to be known as Bharata because it contains the stories of the descendants of one of the earliest Vedic tribes called Bharata. The final compilation increased the verses to 1 lakh, which came to be known as the Mahabharata of Sat- Sata- Shatasahasri Samhita. It contains narratives, descriptive and didactic material. The main narrative, which relates to the Kaurava Pandava conflict, may relate to the latter Vedic period. The descriptive portion might be of the post Vedic period, and the didactic portion generally relate to the post Maurya and Gupta period. Similarly, the Ramayana of Valmiki, originally considered of 6,000 verses, which were raised to 12,000 and eventually to 24,000. Although this epic appears to be more unified than the Mahabharata, it too has its didactic part, which were subsequently added. The Ramayana composition started in the 5th century BC. After that, it passed through as many as 5 stages, and the fifth stage seems to have been as late as the 12th century AD. As a whole, the text seems to have been composed later than the Mahabharata. In the post Vedic period, we have a large corpus of ritual literature, grand public sacrifices to be made by princes and men of substances belonging to the three higher Varnas, as Varnas are set out in the Shaw Srauta Sutras, which provide for several ostentatious royal coronation ceremonies. Similarly, domestic rituals connected with birth, naming, sacred thread, investiture, marriage, funeral, etc., are prescribed in Griha Sutras. Both the Srauta Sutras and Griha Sutras relate to c. 600 to 300 BC. Mention many also be made of the Sulva Sutra, which prescribe various kind of measurement for the construction of sacrificial altars. They mark the beginning of the study of geometry, mathematics. The religious books of the Jainas and Buddhists refer to historical persons and incidents. The earliest Buddhist texts were written in Pali, which was spoken in Magadha or South Bihar and was basically a form of Prakrit. They were finally compiled in the 1st century BC in Sri Lanka, but the canonical portions reflect the state of affairs in India in the age of Buddha. They tell us not only about the life of Buddha but also about some of his royal contemporaries who ruled over Magadha, North Bihar, and eastern UP. The most important and interesting portion of the non canonical literature is provided by the stories of previous births of Gautam Buddha. It was believed that before he was actually born as Gautama, the Buddha passed through over 550 bards, in many cases in form of animals. Each bard story is called a Jataka, which is a folk tale. The Jatakas threw invaluable light on social and economic condition of the period between the 5th and 2nd century BC. They also make incidental references to political events in the age of Buddha. The Jaina texts were written in Prakrit and were eventually compiled in AD 6th century in Vallavi in Gujarat. They, however, contain many passages that help us to reconstruct the political history of eastern UP and Bihar in the age of Mahavira. The Jaina texts refer repeatedly to trade and traders. We also have a large body of secular literature to do this class belong the law books called Dharma Sutras and Smritis, which together with their commentaries are called Dharma Sutras. The Dharma Sutra were compiled in 500 to 200 BC, and the principal Smriti were codified in the text 6th century. In the first 6 centuries of the Christian era, they prescribed the duties of performed by the different varnas as well as by king and their officials. They set out the rules for marriage together with the laws according to which property is to be held, sold, and inherited. They also prescribed punishment for persons guilty of theft, assault, murder, adultery, and the like. An important law book is Arthashastra of Kautilya. The text is divided into 15 books, of which books 2 and 3 may be regarded as being of the earlier date and seem to have been the work of different hands. This text was put in its first formal in the beginning of the Christian era, but its earliest portions reflect the state of society and economy in the age of the Maurya. It provides rich material for study of ancient Indian polity and economy. Of the non-religious texts, the grammatical works are very important in historical construction. They begin with the Astadhyayi of Panini. Panini lived in the northwestern part of the subcontinent. He is not mentioned in Pali text, which principally represent Bihar and UP. Panini is dated around 450 BC as BC by V.S. Agarwala, who has written about Panini's India in both Hindi and English. In his view, no other text provides as much information about the Janapadas or territorial states of pre-Mauryan times as Panini does. Patanjali's commentary on Panini, dated 150 BC, supplies valuable information about post-Maurya times. We also have the work of Vasa, Sudraka, Kalidasa, and Vanbhatta. Apart from their literary value, they mirrored the conditions of the times to which the writers belonged. The work of Kalidasa comprise Kavasya and Dharma, the most famous of which is Avijja, Avigyanam Sakuntalam. Besides being great creative composition, they provide us with glimpses of social and cultural life of the Guptas. In addition to Sanskrit sources, we have some of the earliest Tamil texts in the corpus of Sangam literature. This literature was produced over a period of 3 to 4 centuries by poets who assembled in colleges patronized by the chiefs and kings. Such colleges were called Sangam, and the literature produced in these assemblies was known as Sangam literature. The compilation of the corpus is attributed to the first four Christian countries, although they were really completed by 6th century. The Sangam literature comprises about 30,000 lines of poetry arranged in eight anthologies called Ituk, Itutokai. The poems are collected in groups of hundreds such as Purananuru, the 400 of exterior. There are two main groups, Patiningal Kannaku, the 18 lower collection, and Pattu Pattu, the 10th song. The former is generally assumed to be older than the latter and hence is considered to be the great historical importance. The Sangam texts have several layers, but at present this cannot be established on the basis of style and content, but as shown later they can be detected on the basis of stages in social evolution. The Sangam texts are different from the Vedic text, particularly the Rig Veda. They do not constitute religious literature. The short and long poems were composed by numerous poets in praise of various heroes and heroines and are the secular in nature. They are not primitive songs but literature of high quality. Many poems mention a warrior or a chief or a king by name and describe in detail his military exploits. The gifts made by him to bards and warriors are celebrated. These poems may have been recited in the courts. They are compared with the heroic poetry of Homer Homeric age, for they represent a heroic age of warriors and battles. It is difficult to use this text for historical purpose. Perhaps the purpose names, titles, dynasties, territories, wars, and the like mentioned in the poems are partly real. Some of these Chera king mentioned in the Sangam text also appear as donor in inscription of 1st and 2nd centuries. The Sangam text refer to many settlements, including Kaveri Pattanam, whose flourishing existence has now been archaeologically corroborated. They also speak to the Yavanas coming in their own vessels, purchasing paper with gold and supplying wine and women slaves to the natives. This trade is known not only from Latin and Greek writings but also from the archaeological record. The Sangam literature is a major source of our information for the social, economic, and political life of the people living in the deltaic Tamil Nadu in the early Christian centuries. What it says about trade and e-commerce is confirmed by foreign accounts and archaeological finds. Foreign accounts. Indigenous literature can be supplemented by foreign accounts. To India came Greek, Roman, Chinese visitors either as travelers or religious converts, and they left behind accounts of the things that they saw. It is remarkable that Alexander's invasion finds no mention in Indian sources, and it is entirely on the basis of the Greek sources that we have to reconstruct the history of his Indian exploits. The Greek writers mentioned Sandrocotta and a contemporary of Alexander the Great, who invaded India in 326 BC. Prince Chandragupta is identified as Chandragupta Maurya, whose date of accession is fixed at 322 BC. This identification has served as the sheet anchor in ancient Indian chronology. The Indica of Megasthenes, who came to the court of Chandragupta Maurya, has been preserved only in fragments quoted by subsequent classical writers. These fragments, when read together, furnish valuable information not only about the system of Maurya administration but also about social classes and economic activities in the Maurya period. The Indica is not free from credulity and exaggerations, which is true of many other ancient accounts. Greek and Roman accounts of the 1st and 2nd centuries mentioned many Indian ports and enumerate items of trade between India and the Roman Empire.